This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. My guest today is Hudson Hollister, co-founder and CEO of HData, an AI native operating system for energy regulation. Hudson's going to describe how HData can provide greater insight to power sector regulatory proceedings for commissioners, utilities, and everybody else that's a stakeholder in these increasingly important proceedings that determine what's going on in our electric power sector and how much your electricity costs. As an attorney, Hudson worked in the private sector and then at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and as counsel to the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Reform. This guy knows what he's talking about. He founded and led the Data Coalition and then the Data Foundation. He was on the faculty of the University of St. Francis and then the Northwestern University School of Law faculty. And since 2019, he's led HData. So Hudson, to begin with, tell our listeners about your background and why you moved HData into the power sector regulatory data. You were not all over, but Securities and Exchange Commission, Committee on Oversight and Reform. This is much more broad-based. Now you're digging into this very specific area of power sector regulation. Tell us how you got there.
I'm here because my career has shown me what happens when regulation doesn't work well. I was a staffer at the Securities and Exchange Commission during the Great Financial Crisis, and that was a great example of regulatory failure. The SEC did not anticipate the financial crisis, and I know the reason why, or at least one of the reasons why. I saw it inside. We had 500 lawyers, and they were manually checking the mathematics of banks' financial statements with a calculator. There was no technology. There was no digital way of tracking the most important concepts in those filings that we were collecting at the SEC. I have been seeking to fix regulation ever since, including in those different roles that you've described. Energy regulation is the bottleneck of so much that needs to happen in our built environment, in our economy, and in our world. This is because in the energy sector, everything that gets built or bought or connected has to be approved. Regulatory commissions have the final say on what utilities are allowed to charge through to their customers. This means that rate cases count for so much. Over the next 5 years, we have to deploy $2.5 trillion of utility infrastructure if we're going to have a chance at being able to fulfill all the demand that we're seeing. If we're going to continue the energy transition, if we're going to supply data centers without putting too much of a burden on commercial and residential ratepayers, so much more infrastructure has to go through. And the way it goes through is regulatory proceedings. HData is here to remove the friction from those regulatory proceedings. Our team is former government officials. It's people that came from utility commissions, people that came from utilities, and experts on the right technologies to bring the information together. And together, we are seeking to deploy our platform to automate rate proceedings and energy regulation across the industry. Our customers are the regulators, like the commissions, the regulated, like 30 investor-owned utilities, and other participants like the hyperscalers and power buyers and advocates. We bring those customers together, we bring them together on one platform, and we help them work together to solve the big math problem of rate cases faster.
Independent platform. I just want to add, though, by the way, that you are in the right place at the right time. I mean, I think during the financial crisis, maybe you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But
I was in a sad place.
What's interesting about today is that everything about power sector regulation is becoming important. It's becoming a little bit cool to know how it works. I was talking to someone who worked in the Biden administration in the Department of Energy, has worked at FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who was saying she referred to herself as a transmission nerd. I said yes, and they are going to continue calling us nerds,
And
but
nerds will take
now they're going to
over.
be right now they're going to be calling us nerds with respect.
Yes.
So let's talk about HData. What is an AI native operating system? Exactly what does your data request management software do? What range of regulatory proceeding filings can it reach? How can it provide information without making just dumping everything so it's too comprehensive to view? So how do you manage this system, and what does it do?
You can think of HData as three categories with AI as a layer on top. The categories are data, workflows, and a network. And I'll explain what those things are and how they work together. First is data. We have collected everything that's ever happened in energy regulation all in one place. Every document from every docket from every regulatory commission, as far back as the archives go, everything that the ISOs and RTOs in our industry are doing, every resource plan that utilities have filed, and also our customers put their own internal confidential files in their archives from handling energy regulation in the past. Also, every number from every financial form that utilities file with the FERC, all of the numbers that are reported by the Energy Information Administration. We try to create the most comprehensive data source of everything that has ever happened in energy regulation, both public and then also contributed by our customers. That's the first thing. The second thing is workflows. Data request management is the one that you mentioned, Herman. It's processes that do the jobs that you have to get done if you're working in energy regulation. And I'll say more about data request management later on. The third thing is a network. Our customers are energy regulation because these proceedings that happen to approve a piece of infrastructure, they've got three kinds of parties to them. Usually there's a regulator presiding over it. There is a utility that wants to get something done or deploy something or pay for something. And there's other parties, the third parties, like the attorney general or the manufacturers group or the hyperscalers or the power purchasers that might come in and participate as well. And they all have to negotiate together. These three kinds of entities are the customer base. We have 9 regulators, 60 energy companies, 110 of the third parties, all using HData. And so we bring their identities into the platform, and the network is part of the value. On top of all of this, we have an AI layer. Now, almost all of our customers are using frontier models like ChatGPT or Claude, but those frontier models don't get the work done because they hallucinate, because they do not allow you to get all the way back to a source, or because they don't allow you to connect with your peers. Our AI layer does those things. Our AI layer interprets all the information without hallucination and with full transparency so you can see how it came up with something. The data, the workflows, and the network with the AI layer on top, that's what people use to get their work done. Now, there's lots of different kinds of work. You asked about data requests. I'll give you 2 examples of the kinds of things that people can do inside of HData.
You just anticipated my next question. I was
Yeah.
going to ask you to give me some examples.
Yeah. Suppose I'm a gas utility and I am planning to ask for a change to the return on equity in my state. And then suppose further that my company owns gas utilities in other states as well. When I'm planning to ask for that rate, for that return on equity change, I'm anticipating that I need to justify it by the infrastructure spend that I'm doing in that state. But I also need to consider that there will be people opposing this coming into the rate case. And they're going to be looking at the testimony that I filed for my company's other rate cases for other gas utilities in the other states. HData will allow me to instantly see what those other parties have done everywhere around the country, the arguments they have raised that I need to anticipate. HData will let me instantly see what I have said everywhere in the other jurisdictions for my other gas utilities in the other states, so that I can make sure to be consistent. I can anticipate the arguments that will come up against me because I can see what those anticipated intervenors have done everywhere. And I can also make sure that the testimony I'm writing is consistent with what I have done. Without HData, I would be relying on my memory, my institutional memory, and maybe a bunch of PDFs in Control F.
Just want to ask you a quick question. Presumably, it works from the opposite direction too. If you're a stakeholder and you're aware, let's say you're a consumer advocate, and you're aware that somebody's coming in to ask for more spending, which consumer advocates frequently, though not always, oppose, you can prepare by knowing what the utility, the gas utility asked for in other states, what arguments it made when it asked for increases, right? Am I saying that right? Am I getting that right?
This is why we have customers that are consumer advocates and we have customers that are utilities, both.
Interesting.
That's the first example, preparing for and managing energy regulation. But the second example is the phrase that you mentioned, Herman, data request management. Rate cases in energy are kind of like lawsuits. Just like I used to be a litigator and I used to do this terrible work. In a lawsuit, you know that one party can issue discovery requests, the other party is obliged to answer, and they kind of volley back and forth. And when I was running this at a law firm, oh, you better believe that whenever we got a data request from the other party, we would object to it all over the place, and we would draft 20 pages of objections and explanations, and the actual answer would be buried down in a teeny little bullet point in the fourth page. In a similar fashion, data requests are volleyed back and forth in rate cases, but it's more complicated and more expensive because the utility can get thousands of requests, not just from the government regulator, but also from all those third parties like the consumer advocate. And in many cases, the regulator or the advocate, they don't have enough staff to fully read whatever the questions are about. This is where the waste comes in. Oftentimes, the questions are about things that could be answered from the corpus of what's already there. HData helps all the parties in this instance. HData helps the regulator figure out what's in the application and the millions of pages of supporting details so they can understand what do they actually have to draft formal questions about. HData helps the consumer advocate in the similar fashion. And for the utility, HData offers data request management. So when a new request comes in, the utility can automatically run that request against everything they've said in the past, even in other rate cases, even in other jurisdictions. They can then have HData automatically draft a proposed answer and then figure out if the facts on the ground have changed and then finalize the answer. So much of the pain of energy regulation, the reason why it takes so long to get a new plant approved, or the reason why it's so expensive to get a new transmission line put in, is data requests. It's because the utility is getting thousands of data requests that they must spend millions of dollars answering. And if you want to narrow all the way down to why they're painful, it's because of subject matter experts' days getting ruined. If you are the head of transmission at a utility, it is not uncommon for regulatory affairs, some person from regulatory affairs to contact you and say, I'm so sorry, but we've received this request in our rate case, and you need to get us an answer in 3 business days. That ruins somebody's day if you're a subject matter expert at a utility. But with HData, that person still has to contact you, but they say, we got this request. We have all of your answers from all the previous times. Here is what HData suggests should be the basis for your answer. Just tell us what's different and then sign off on it. This ruins the subject matter expert's day so much less. And that means, suddenly zooming out to the big picture, it means the whole process can go so much faster, and the infrastructure we need to build for the energy transition or for getting rising demand, the infrastructure can get approved and put in place much faster.
I want to ask you one question about that. It sounds like a regulator, after sitting through all the hearings and reading all the submissions in a case, whether it's a rate case or many other kinds of cases that come before these regulators, they can just take that one body of information that was formed from what they call the record, what all legal minds call the record in that case. Take and they could go through that, and you could ask HData to summarize, to highlight, to explore certain questions that you had during the proceeding. Am I right that a regulator could use HData in that way?
Well, the regulator could also use Claude to do that. Summarization is possible for frontier models even without assistance. But
Mm.
what our customers are using HData to do is identify all of the requirements from the final order and then cite back to where those requirements came from in the record and allow you to click through from the final order through a citation to the right document in the record and see the sentence that it came from all the way in that document. And then to track those requirements over time and see how they change and put those into a table. Those are the kinds of things, the citation, the lack of hallucinations, the accuracy, the recall, the ability to do this against hundreds of documents at once. Those are the things that had to be purpose built for energy and had to be brought in from our data. So the AI layer can do those things, but it's got the data behind it.
Now, you just announced a partnership with an organization called IFS Copperleaf, which is a very well-known organization in the regulatory world and in the data world. Tell me about that partnership. Tell us, for listeners who don't know, what IFS Copperleaf does, and what does the partnership mean for you and for IFS Copperleaf?
IFS Copperleaf is the leading provider of capital management solutions. There's $2.9 trillion of assets that utilities manage using IFS Copperleaf. Obviously, capital spending is paramount in the utilities industry because the way utilities make money is a reasonable return on equity on their rate base, on their CapEx, their capital spend. IFS Copperleaf runs that. It's used by the financial leadership of so many utilities. One of the big challenges that every utility has is the risk that the capital spending they're planning might not get approved. In a recent year, $100 billion of proposed capital spending was denied by regulators. It would be better if they fashioned their plans in such a way that they could get approval, and so you wouldn't have $100 billion start and stop like that. That's where HData comes in. Under our partnership, which we announced a couple of weeks ago with IFS Copperleaf, HData's regulatory corpus will be sent right over into IFS Copperleaf on an asset-by-asset basis. For each capital spend plan that IFS Copperleaf customers are managing, they will see the regulatory signals that will help them to understand the risks for that specific plan and that specific piece of infrastructure for the jurisdiction that they're in. Risks that might come from what the state legislature is doing, and then especially risks that might come from the rate cases that govern that jurisdiction. This means that utilities can create a defensible plan. They can get all the way from the funding, from filing to having the plan funded, and they can be more certain about creating plans that will achieve regulatory approval.
So they know that the amount that they're requesting is in line with the record, not just of its own utility history, but the entire jurisdiction's history. Is that,
yes.
Am I saying that right?
You're sensing that accurately. And of course, for HData, I mentioned how our components are the data, the workflows, and the network. This gets to the value of the data. We always want to have the best data corpus of everything that has ever happened in energy regulation. And I'm so excited that we'll have the ability to provide that value to the customers of IFS Copperleaf who are seeking to build a faster, more defensible path all the way from filing to a funded plan.
Let me just ask you one more question, Hudson. It's a question that I've heard so often in my 20 years as a reporter, which is that the utilities overwhelm everybody, the regulators, the stakeholders, the consumer advocates, with information. It sounds like HData could, let's say, balance the access to information, but are the costs for that access to information something that regulatory commissions on a budget can afford, or that consumer advocates who often aren't funded as well as utilities, could they afford this? And therefore, could HData be a pathway to balancing information access in proceedings?
Yes. Yeah. We make no secret of the fact that our pricing is different for nonprofits and
Oh,
governments compared to utilities. And part of that is tied to the amount of value. You say that you point out that sometimes the advocates or the commissions feel overwhelmed by the volume of information from utilities. Well, in a different way, the utility teams that I talk to feel overwhelmed as well, because the things they're doing are increasingly receiving so much scrutiny because of politics and because the structure of the energy industry has changed. There's also generational change happening for all of these participants in energy regulation. We have people that might have known the industry for so long, they might remember what the specific return on equity was from 1972 in Illinois for the Ameren rate case, and they might remember where it was on the page of the final order. Well, that institutional knowledge increasingly is retiring. And so all of the parties feel overwhelmed in different ways. By pulling together the right kind of information and providing it with that AI layer, we can help all of them. And it's in my interests to make sure that the investor-owned utilities, the state governments, the advocacy organizations can all use it, because HData itself gets more valuable if more of the community is brought together. We're doing that in a small way, just with in-person gatherings, and then in a bigger way with technology. Our customers will be gathering at Let's Go 2026, our customer conference in Denver in October. And we'll have our utility commission partners and our utility partners and our nonprofit partners all in one room, communicating with each other. And then in a bigger fashion, I mentioned data request management and other workflows. There are ways to bring people together digitally too, so that the enormous math problem, which has to be solved by a negotiation between regulator, regulated, and advocate, that negotiation can happen more efficiently.
That's a good place to leave it. By the way, you've picked an excellent state to have your conference in, because the Colorado Commission is really one of the most sophisticated I've ever had a chance to work with. But we'll get into that another time. I want to thank you. My guest has been HData CEO and founder Hudson Hollister, and he's described the ways that HData's operating system, AI native operating system, can provide greater insight to power sector regulatory proceedings for commissioners, utilities, and the many other stakeholders. And I also want to thank my producer, Melissa Brown. And as always, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.